Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Let's Talk Movies. We've got a gem today for you, a personal favorite of mine called Darkest Hour, starring Gary Oldman. Today, as an experiment, we're going to try to keep the runtime of our review to under 30 minutes. So we're going to be kind of speed running our normal discussions, and so be prepared for a more action-packed version of the usual analysis that you get on this channel. So, having said that, John, take it away.
Yep. So today we're reviewing. Did you mention the name of it? You didn't.
Darkest Hour.
Darkest Hour.
Mm-hmm. This movie came out in 2017.
Yeah, it came out in 2017. Same year as Dunkirk, which is interesting.
Very
the
interesting.
Two obviously movies kind of intertwined in their events. Anyway, this movie centers on the famous Prime Minister, wartime Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill. It takes place all in the time span of May 1940 when he was made Prime Minister, and obviously he came into kind of a precarious situation. Hitler and the Nazis were taking over everything in Europe. France was about to fall, Belgium had fallen, and so Churchill comes into this very, not very good situation, to say the least. And, he's forced to kind of, make big decisions and lead his country in the right direction. And so that's kind of what this movie is about. It takes place over these 2 or 3 weeks, and it's really about just this leader and the decisions he has to make to, for the good of his people. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it's really about. I'll go through some of the specs as we usually do. Pull them up here. As Nate said, it came out in 2017, the same year as Dunkirk. It was directed by Joe Wright.
Joe Wright.
Joe Wright. That's
Joe
like the
Wright.
most. I don't know why that name's really British. Anyway, he is British. Joe is directed by Joe Wright. Written by a guy named Anthony McCartan. Which very good screenplay. We can talk about that. It was produced by Tim Bevan, Lisa Bruce, Eric Fellner, Anthony McCartan, the screenwriter, and Douglas Urbanski. It stars, of course, Gary Oldman as Winston Churchill, and we'll get into how great he was in this movie. It also stars Kristen Scott Thomas as his wife, Lily James as his typewriter, Stephen Delane, Ronald Pickup, and Ben Mendelsohn. Cinematography, which was phenomenal, was by Bruno Del Bonel. It was edited by Valerio Bonelli. Music was by Dario Marianelli. The production companies were Perfect World Pictures and Working Title Films. It was distributed by Focus Features in the U.S. and internationally by Universal Pictures. It came out on September 1st, 2017. That was its debut. And then it went wide in the U.S. on the 22nd of November and in the United Kingdom on the 12th of January, 2018. It has a runtime just over 2 hours, 2 hours and 5 minutes. This was a fully United Kingdom production, so it is a fully British movie. Its language is obviously English. It had a pretty big, decent budget, $30 million, and it made $150.8 million at the box office.
Good return on investment there.
So it was a good return on investment.
I gotta say, I'll hold down the fort here. Yep. This has got to be my favorite bit of British cinema I have ever watched. Not that I'm a huge connoisseur. There's people out there who are really into British cinema. I'm not one of those people, but out of all of the English movies I've seen, this one takes the cake. Darkest Hour is my top number 10 or number 1 rather.
Yes, I have seen just to go off of that. Yeah, it's up there with The King's Speech, which is a movie we'll probably do at some point. Which is also it's actually about the king in this movie, George VI. But yes, those two movies, Darkest Hour and The King's Speech, are two of the best British movies. Oh, Chariots of Fire is probably those are my top 3, and we should definitely do Chariots of Fire. That is a great true story.
Sounds very interesting.
Yes, but yeah, so British cinema, not the biggest fan usually because it can be kind of pretentious.
It can.
But the ones that are more historically based are more entertaining and very well done. They seem to be more well done.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get into positives. Yep. And a quick caveat on the positives: me and John both enjoyed a lot of the aspects of this movie. So you can, if one of us says that we like something, you can take it as a given that the other person also picked that thing as a positive, but we'll kind of divide it up to talk about it. So you want to get that started, John?
Sure. So obviously, he'll probably obviously like you just said, he'll touch on this as well. The acting in this movie all around is phenomenal.
Oh, dang.
But we got to start, of course, with the title, or not the title role, but the main character, Winston Churchill, who's played magnificently by Gary Oldman. First of all, we just gotta realize that this guy like sat in a makeup chair for like hours on end to even get looking like the character. And then he not only does that, but he makes it pay off because he delivers this like just phenomenal performance. So I'll just go through a couple of the layers of the character that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed obviously how he just gets all of like his mannerisms and just like his little quirks down, like they're all there in the movie. And it's just, there's some actually quite funny moments at the beginning, and that's kind of a separate positive. Like there's some good humor in this movie actually at the beginning, in a movie that's kind of hard to get humor in.
Darkest Hour.
So, yeah, I mean, the title's rather foreboding. But anyway, so yeah, he's Gary Oldman really gets a lot of those quirks in. He really just shows how quirky of an individual Churchill was. We kind of have this idea that these great heroes and like, great heroes are like these like super like always straight-laced guys, and like, but no, most of them have their, like all of us have their unique, qualities. And so yeah, I really liked that, how Gary Oldman really brought those quirks to the role.
Gary Oldman brought us a living, breathing Winston Churchill, who you could get to know like a friend. And like John said, he wasn't always perfect. It's but it was so fascinating to watch. It was. Yeah,
and then anyway, so since we're probably both going to talk about how we liked Gary Oldman's performance, what was your favorite part of it?
Gary Oldman's performance. Man, first of all, how he acted through the makeup was incredible. And I love how he had this ornery, brash side to him. Like at the beginning of the movie, he yells at his secretary until she cries.
Makes her cry.
It's hilarious.
You were literally like, it's funny.
I thought that was really funny how he yelled at her until she cried.
I laughed more at the part where he's like, I'm in the bathroom, I'm coming out. He uses some like British word for like, I'm coming out and I'm going to be naked.
He said,
what does he say?
Coming out in the form of nature or something like that.
That's what he said.
That
part was more funny, but anyway.
Yes, and I have a caveat about his performance that I'll talk about in the negatives, but like, this is, he really respected Winston Churchill in this performance, not by glorifying him, but by presenting him authentically. And so we really got that out of the performance. All right, so I'm going to go next. Something I really loved about this movie, I think you're going to touch on cinematography, I'm going to give you that one, is the tension in this movie. They handle the tension masterfully in this movie. This is events that most people are very familiar with, at least on a basic level, because of how much they're taught in schools. And even so, it had me the entire movie anxious about what was going to happen. Even though I know exactly what's going to happen. I literally had to keep reminding myself, Nate, you know that they saved the people from Dunkirk. All of them get away. But this movie was so good at stringing out that suspense that it did that. It really brought us into the inner workings of the British government at that time, which was fascinating to see. I love how they all like yell at each other in the House of the Lords. I wish that we did that here in the U.S.
Maybe they do. If we had underground bunkers, maybe they would.
Maybe they would yell at me. I mean, like when they're all together.
Where
they
the Parliament.
And also I'm really romantic about this period, so I think it's really cool. And I'll get into the production design later. But anyhow, what I'm talking about is the tension. They did a very good job of. First of all, everyone else doubted Winston Churchill and his war policy. Then they made us doubt Winston Churchill and his war policy. And finally, towards the end of the movie, they make Winston Churchill doubt his own policy of war against the Nazis. And I'm going to get into, what reverses that later, but that ramping up of tension throughout the whole movie without giving us any, it was a recipe for a good viewing experience.
I totally agree. The tension is phenomenal in the movie. Like it makes you really believe this is the darkest hour.
Yes, it does.
For at least Britain and really for the world. Because even though this movie is about the Britain and like Europe, so like Britain, France, and like that area of Europe, I mean, it really was like the darkest hour for the whole world. Even though America wasn't in the war yet, there's actually there's a really great scene where he like calls Franklin Delano Roosevelt and they're talking on the phone and he's like, "Dude, you gotta help me."
I feel like that was like a version of Zelensky on the phone with Joe Biden.
He was like trying to say, "I need you to get the heck over here," in like the nicest way. Anyway, but before I hit on the cinematography, I wanted to go off something you said with the how it shows the inner workings of the government. I really enjoy how they show all these different real life characters in such a real kind of raw way, like that feels like authentic. Like, so they obviously depict Neville Chamberlain, the prime minister before,
and then the Halifax,
and then Halifax, who's like, these guys are both against Churchill, like they're opponents of his policy. They want to negotiate peace. Even though I think even they know they're not going to really get a good deal out of that. But anyway, they're like, no, we can't fight. We got to negotiate peace. Anyway, and there's just these great scenes of them just arguing with Churchill. And anyway, I just love how they really showed. First of all, they set up the historical situation very well.
With context.
In the opening few scenes, with like showing what's going on, who's the prime minister, okay, he gets removed, so then Churchill's in. Mm-hmm. And it really sets up, these guys who are on this side, mm-hmm. and Churchill, and really, Churchill's, and I guess like his typewriter and his wife are like on this. I mean, Churchill doesn't have too many political allies in the movie.
No.
I mean, obviously he had other people, but the ones depicted in the movie are mostly against him.
Yes, and that goes back to the tension. Yeah. But I see that we're running short on time here, yeah. So let's.
Anyway, I was going to go ahead and step time.
Yeah, let's kind of. I have a couple more too, so let's get rapid fire.
Yeah, rapid fire.
Yeah. So you go ahead.
Okay, so cinematography, really phenomenal in this movie. I've seen this one time, and I didn't remember how great the camera movements were. The quality of the shots are like beyond amazing, and I'll just hit on a few shots that I really enjoyed. One, the opening scene where it like pans down onto the Parliament, and it like
that's a great
pans forward into them arguing with each other. A phenomenal shot.
They really utilized that overhead shot.
Yeah, they did. Yep. And then the second one, there's a shot of all these explosions, and then it transforms into a dude's like a dead body's the face of a dead body. Third, the scene where they bomb, the Germans bomb the last like remaining faction of the Calais troops, and it's just this. It follows the general, and he's reading the letter, and then it goes up, and all these bombs start falling. And one final, this is kind of a more broad one. Throughout the movie, in the bunker scenes, it really like orients you to this bunker and like where everything is, because it has these tracking shots as it follows this guy showing his Winston Churchill's typewriter where her room is, and there's these great scenes of it, like going this way, and it'll go like through a wall, and you'll see him on the other side. Some phenomenal.
And a theme I saw they kept hitting on was when they would zoom out of him being in a room, and he would be in this room, and he would be surrounded by blackness. And I felt like they were hitting on the theme of like isolation that Winston Churchill was feeling through the cinematography. Something I want to hit on briefly is production design in this movie was phenomenal. They grounded us in the time. I love how they used elements of the production design to emphasize the themes, as I just talked about. Another one that I noticed is how at the beginning of the movie, Winston Churchill was looking at all of these people as he was driving. They were all happy. They were all bustling. It was just life is normal. And somebody even commented, it doesn't look like they're at war. And then at the end, towards the end of the movie, he was driving through in the rain when everything seemed horrible, and everybody was getting ready for war. And I feel like there was a parallel there that was really masterful. And
that was cool. Yeah, I didn't pick up on that at the beginning. They were kind of like happy and stuff.
And then they were like, it was. And then I want to talk about briefly my favorite part of the movie, which my favorite parts of movies tend to be this. Like they call it. In storytelling terms, you get into a point, you have increasing tension, and then there's a peak, and at that peak, there's a conflict with the main antagonist force, and then generally, in my opinion, good practice in storytelling is to have the protagonist lose that confrontation, and then you enter into a part of the story which is called the belly of the whale, and that's when things are the worst they can be. Yeah. And at the end of the belly of the whale, there is a turning point. There's something that happens that reinvigorates the protagonist. And that part of a story, right at the end of the belly of the whale, is my favorite part generally. And they did it so well in this movie. And it takes the form of when the king visits Winston Churchill to tell him that he actually has his support. Now, this is a character that the movie has portrayed as being his worst enemy the whole time. And I know they were setting up this really surprising change because they casted the king as a character that is, I don't know the actor's name.
I don't either.
But you know as well as I do that this guy is only casted for villain roles. This guy is known for his villainous roles. And so they were very intentionally trying to subconsciously tell us that this guy was the enemy. And he, in a great show of just, personal integrity, flips his opinion and honestly tells Winston Churchill that he has his support in the pro-war policy and that he needs to pull the people, which Winston Churchill does, and that's how he ends up convincing everyone, because even he was feeling defeated by the anti-war faction, and this changed. It surprised me so much, and I was just delighted by how thoughtfully pulled off this plot device was. That was my favorite part of the movie.
I will say, I'll comment on that real quick. Just the structure of the movie. This movie has a different structure than most movies.
Yes, it does.
It's not the general like you said, the peak is rather late in the movie. Like it's like past even probably the 2/3 point, which is that scene, and then his Winston Churchill's famous speech is like the final scene. But this movie has a different structure from most movies in that the tension is there and it's kind of moving at this good pace, and then it's not like there's like a massive attack anywhere in the movie on England or anything where like our main characters are immediately put in danger, but it's so good at maintaining that tension away from England and like what's going on in France and Belgium and Dunkirk that it can pull that off without having to have our characters be like having guns fired at them or anything. And then obviously you have the phenomenal climax with the speech by Winston Churchill.
Oh, and also score, amazing. Score, so good. I don't have time to touch on it, but it just accented the whole movie.
All I'll say about it is that I think it really was very foreboding and really went with the theme with the title, Darkest Hour.
And it was heavily piano centered.
Yes.
And it just did a great job.
Yeah.
So,
and I have one more positive.
Yeah, go ahead.
My kind of third big one is the screenplay. The screenplay by, I think it was Anthony Mackison was what his name was very, or McCartan, Andrew McCartan. It was very well written. Like, this was not based on any type of book or anything. This was like an original screenplay, and I always appreciate those, because that's like hard to write a historical movie original screenplay, because like a lot of them are based on like historical books, like either historical fiction or like just biographies or whatever. Well, no, this one he just like put pen to paper and was like, let's do it.
Let's go.
And there's just so many great scenes of like dialogue between and like conversations between Churchill and his political allies and it was enemies mostly.
This was very skillfully done.
It was just very, and there was obviously some great humor in there at the beginning, which I think they worked in very well. It didn't like take front and center stage, nor should it have, but it did kind of, there were some good humorous moments. But my favorite line of dialogue, and so crisp, is just when Churchill is, I told you this before we watched it, is the scene where Churchill, they're trying to get him to get her into peace negotiations, and he's like, "You cannot reason with a tiger!" What does he say?
When it has your head in its mouth.
Yes, and it's just like gets you fired up. Like, and that just, the acting obviously by Gary Oldman is like at its peak there. Like, it's just phenomenal. Like, you never see Gary Oldman. It's always Winston Churchill.
No, it's true.
Anyway, so the screenplay was phenomenal. And anyway, so do we want to move into negatives or nitpicks?
Nitpicks. I've got two nitpicks. We're gonna have to get through them a little bit quickly here.
So we can get to the history.
So we can get into the history and themes real quickly.
If we go like a few minutes over.
Oh, for sure. That's.
We're trying to aim for 30 to 40 minutes, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, so we can have viewer retention. That's the idea. Yeah, because y'all aren't watching our whole discussions for some reason. They're like an hour and a half long.
But they are more like podcasts.
Yeah. So anyhow, so first nitpick. I mean, obviously nitpicks here, but no movie is perfect. So the first thing is that it was not, it's sort of not a plot hole, just like something that was not made clear to me through the movie, is why Halifax wasn't elected prime minister. So like,
I was confused too.
He was super confusing because he was the popular candidate. Everyone seemed to like him. And then they were like, they were all sitting around the table and it's like, oh, Chamberlain has to sit down or resign rather. And they're like, okay, so obviously it has to be Halifax. We all like him. We all like his policies. It's easy. And then he says, well, I'm afraid it is not my time. And they all kind of groan and look at each other. Yeah. And then later in the movie, like, they make another statement which takes that into question. Like, somebody said something like he would have taken up the position in a moment if he could, and it was like, I was sitting there like, they literally offered him the position and he just like shrugged it off with this one line that did not explain why he did not want to be, because he spent the rest of the movie, the plot was trying to imply that he wanted Churchill's position.
Yeah.
That he was pining
He's
after
like,
it.
and he's like on his war council, and he's like, why are you all opposed to? Why you could have been the prime minister?
Exactly.
Like, you could have made the peace negotiations.
And so he decided to not be prime minister, and then constantly harass the prime minister about doing his policy.
No, it makes me, from a historical standpoint, it makes me wonder if there was like a more complicated reason, and they didn't want to like bog down the story by like, having to explain it.
I mean,
I don't know.
The best explanation I could think of in my head is that Halifax was scared of the responsibility. However, that was an explanation that I engineered up in my head. They did not make that clear in the movie. Literally the only explanation we get is he kind of just like looks at everybody. He's like, oh. But it is not my time, and they're all like, "Oh well, if it's not his time." I mean, it's ridiculous.
The actor was good in the role, and so was Neville Chamberlain.
Oh, he was. But then he was super upset about Churchill being the prime minister when he could. It's like that situation in Kingdom of Heaven.
Oh yeah.
It's like it doesn't make any sense. Except this is less painful because it actually ends up good. So that's my major nitpick. I've got
you're talking about when Bailey refuses. Anyway, all right, so I'll give he took my big one. That was mine. So same, ditto.
Same deal.
But I do have one that kind of goes off a bit. I have a couple of rapid fire real quick. One is the king has that accent at certain times when it's not British.
It was kind of weird.
I'm wondering.
It was kind of weird.
It was weird. I don't know. Maybe the king had like his parents had to have both been British. Because he has this weird, like, I don't even know what kind of accent it was. It's sort of, like, he'll have a British accent, and then all of a sudden he'll say one word, and it'll be like...
I'm pretty sure that actor is British.
Yeah.
So it's really weird, because it sounded to me like he just had a bad voice coach.
Yeah, I don't know.
But that can't be the case, because he's British.
It kind of took me out of the movie.
Every 10th word he said...
Yeah, that's it.
Was, like, in this really weird accent. And, and I was like...
The problem is that it took me out of the movie at these times. I'm like, what? Like, whoa, that was weird.
I was like, what's wrong with this
my second nitpick, but that's once again very nitpicky, all right? The guy did a good job with his, like, overall with the performance, but as we touched on the acting and the positives. But my other nitpick is, I mentioned that I loved how they set up the historical context and stuff. I do wish that they had explained a little bit more how this transition from power from like Neville Chamberlain to Churchill works, because it's portrayed as if it kind of is just like
spontaneous.
I'm just coming in, like I feel like there would have been something that like there was a little bit more to it, and I feel like maybe they could have had a scene or something explaining that would have made it a little bit more understandable, like how this transition of power works. I don't know. That was just kind of a...
Speaking of being understandable, I want to get on to my last nitpick, which is concerning Gary Oldman. I loved his performance. I loved his performance. It was great. And he was really he was striving to take on the full mannerisms of Winston Churchill. But in the process, he became, at some points, borderline incomprehensible when he was talking. And I felt so bad for the lady. By the way, the side plot with the lady who's the typewriter, that's really great. We didn't touch on that. That's great. Scenes. I felt so bad for her because he's really hard to understand sometimes.
He is.
And
just because he has that Cockney accent.
Yeah. And let me just put an asterisk by that by saying I really enjoyed the performance, but at some parts I felt like I wanted to have subtitles on, because he was just like really slurring all of his words, and I was having a hard time understanding.
It's kind of part of the character, though.
It is
because obviously he has this problem with mumbling. It's
I did follow the general gist of most of what he said, but I would like to have been a little bit more, and I guess the counter from the movie maker might just be, well, just turn on the subtitles, but that's just a nitpick.
But we can't emphasize enough the subplot there with the typewriter.
That was really
when you watch this movie, or if you've seen it, you know what we're talking about. It's just very well done. It's this nice little undercurrent of the movie. It is. This relationship that develops. And,
that it reminds me, his wife is a really good character.
Yes, played by
I love how they show how steadfast she is, and how much she helps him, but also how much of a struggle she has.
Yeah, and how she points out when he's not. She kind of there's one or two scenes where she basically kind of points out his flaws. She's like, Anyway,
Yeah.
and then there's also that great scene where there's great screenwriting here where she's saying like it's your doubts that make you wise, and that's kind of something we can talk about real quick in the theme section.
Well, let's just jump into the theme section.
You want to do themes and then history?
Let's do themes and then history. Yeah,
That's what we used to do at the very beginning. Then we kind of flip flop.
Yeah, I mean it's just what's natural. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So themes.
That's a good segue.
That's a great segue. Speaking of themes, let's talk about themes.
What's your biggest theme?
So obviously this movie grapples with the really fundamental, which is weird because I've grappled with this, like when do you choose peace and when do you go to war?
Yeah.
Like that was the fundamental question of this movie, and that's the one that they're arguing about the whole time, because when you are in that leadership position, your decisions cost lives. Yeah. And Winston Churchill sacrificed a lot of lives with his decisions. He's remembered well by history because it worked out. Would it have been different if those strategies wouldn't have paid off? He wielded power effectively, and but anyhow, the answer in this scenario is war. And the thing is that in 99% of cases, I would have decided against that. Like I think that most war that nations decide to go to, most war that governments decide to engage in, is not moral. Like the vast majority of wars that governments participate in are done so against moral law. However, I am a believer in Augustine's just war theory.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've heard of that. Yes.
Yes, and so I studied that for a time, and I actually do subscribe to it. Mm-hmm. But my caveat is that most of the time, people think they're going off to just war, they're kidding themselves, because the standards for just war are very strict, and it's most of the time wars do not. So most of the time, in the vast majority of scenarios, I would have been against Winston Churchill. However, this is that 1% time when it is moral to go to war, and the reason is your homeland and the lives of your citizens is in direct risk, and so. Of course I could go into like the 5 tenets of just war, but that's basically what it is that the lives, as a public official, his responsibility, in my estimation, is to protect the jurisdiction of his lands and the lives of his people. Yeah. And both are in direct risk at that point, and it makes it clear throughout the movie that conceding to a peace plan would have been violating that responsibility. And so I think that the movie did a good job of siding with Winston Churchill.
So my biggest theme that I took away was kind of going off of yours, like just the theme of like leadership.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yes, that's just to me like the biggest theme, and you have to hit on it. Like he has to decide what kind of leader he should be. Like,
exactly.
Is he going to be the leader that he knows he should be, and that he owes his people to be, or is he going to be a selfish leader, or one that kind of is timid and like anyway? But to elaborate a little bit. I think that really, just that theme of like, what kind of leader are you going to be? And he faces so many obstacles in this movie and in the course of his whole prime ministership. I guess that's the right word. Anyway, he faces so many obstacles just in these few weeks in May of 1940 from his political allies, from, there's implied to be unrest among the citizens. And they're all like, what are we going to do? Is this guy the right dude? And he has to prove all these people wrong and show them that he can be a leader in times that are tough. Like that he can come back that he can make these tough decisions to sacrifice 4,000 men at Calais to save 300,000. And they almost got, like they said at the end, they basically got almost all of those guys out. And he has to make these big decisions. Like that's a tough choice to sacrifice even like anybody for anybody else. But, he had to make that decision for the good of his people. And, he has to show that even after tragedies such as those 4,000 guys dying, he can go on and still be that good leader and come back from that and, like, show the people that, like, we can't accept peace is not an option really here. All right. It's not in our best, like, interest. And he has to really embody that. And obviously Gary Oldman playing the character just does such a phenomenal job of just in all aspects, as we've said, but of embodying that theme of leadership in Churchill. And I love all the conflicts, and they all build up to this great speech where he really he embodies the principles of being a leader at the most in that speech.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, we are going to fight to the end. You know?
Yeah. I think leadership's a great one.
Yeah.
So we got the themes of war and peace and leadership.
Yeah.
Having said that, let's
go on to history.
Let's go into history and just before we kind of leave you guys to be lonely by yourselves. Talk briefly about Now, I'm not super well versed on this. Obviously, anyone who's gone through high school has got a pretty decent understanding about World War II.
Me neither. You know. I'm more of kind of preliminary knowledge. I pulled up a few things that I'll bring up.
Okay, sure.
But go ahead. I want you to go ahead and talk about, just because you are kind of interested in like the World War II era and like, the production. You mentioned like the production design.
Yeah, the production design.
How accurate was it in your opinion?
Well, I thought it was great.
And just like the setting.
And I loved. There's so many movies about World War II because there's so many different theaters in which World War II was fought, and I thought this was a really underrated one, and it really formed if World War II could be seen as a plot arc structure, this story in and of itself was the belly of the whale for World War II, you know? And so, and that speech at the end is kind of the turning point, like I talked about, and so it's really cool to see that unfold. So it's an underrated time in history, and the production design was great. There's no historical inaccuracies that I saw
in the
I even heard them quoting direct lines from history.
And obviously the speech at the end is
the speech is real, and then also when Halifax, the guy leans over to Halifax and asks what just happened, and he said he mobilized the English language. And
that's a real quote.
That's a real quote, you know, and so they just nods to history like that are just really great, you know.
Yeah. So I'm going to read off a couple inaccuracies that historians have pointed out with this movie, and I'd like you to just, comment.
Sure.
So one of them is, this isn't so much of an inaccuracy as it is kind of just a little bit of a, maybe... Anyway, I'll just say what it is, and y'all can interpret for yourselves. So in the movie, it's depicted as if the British had a little bit more choice between fighting or offering peace. There was this option, kind of, we could try to negotiate peace, but the fighting was basically almost more inevitable. And obviously in this movie, they play up the peace negotiations for the sake of conflict. And I think it made sense because they did have that option. It just wasn't like there weren't as many supporters of it as it appears there are in the movie. And a lot of the shouting matches in the bunker are fictional. Like there wasn't as intense of a debate from what I'm reading over whether we should negotiate peace or fight. Like fighting was almost viewed as like inevitable. Anyway, so I don't know, like, what do you think about that?
I really don't have any comments on that.
Anyway, and also the scene in the Underground Railroad, that is a completely fictional scene.
I imagine that.
And, I mean, that makes sense. You can kind of tell but it works phenomenal in the movie. And then, of course, it's actually some historians question the idea that the majority of British citizens were immediately like inspired by Churchill. Like some think that even after his famous speech, we'll fight them on the beaches and all that, some were still kind of doubting of Churchill.
Well, that makes sense. Like, political consensus is almost impossible. So, of course, there would be some. I think the important thing is that largely public opinion was shifting in that direction. Yeah.
And obviously, it says here, there's no, in the movie, Chamberlain and Halifax continually talk about putting forward, like, a vote of no confidence. It says here there's no conclusive evidence that they ever actually planned that. But the threat existed. Like they never actively planned it, but the threat was there. Like they were
So they were trying to make clear to the viewers that the threat was there.
Yeah. I mean that made sense. But I guess they never, as in the movie, they're pretty much like, we're gonna do this. I guess they never got to that stage.
Why don't you just do one more?
Yeah. And then the Labour Party, obviously. Well, I mean, there's just a few more that I think would be helpful to point out. But anyway, if we could, because I think we're doing it's 33 minutes. So we got 40. I mean, yes. Anyway, the last one in this kind of section is but I mean, the historical actually is though that they did say that they would serve in a national government under a leader other than Chamberlain. They never named Churchill though, so they were definitely opposed to Churchill. I mean, that whole storyline is definitely true. And once again. Let's see here. Do you have any thoughts while I kind of
No, I mean not really.
Yep. Anyway, but the last one kind of is that let's see here. It says that the film gives the impression that both Clementine Churchill, his wife, and the king were able to listen to Churchill's speech on the radio. Apparently, this is not true because radio broadcasts from Parliament didn't start until the 70s, apparently. So that was a little bit of an embellishment. But he did record the speech in 1949 again, I guess, so people could. When we hear it, that's what we're hearing. So I guess that'd be kind of weird. You think about it, he's like giving the speech again. So yeah, it was delivered on June 4th, 1940, after the Dunkirk evacuation, not on May 28th, 1940, as suggested in the film. Which, I mean, it does, I guess, technically suggest that because it moves kind of by a day-by-day frame in the movie, but apparently it took place a little later. June 4th, that's actually, June 6th, 1944, so a little over 4 years later, the Allies would invade for D-Day. And also, the secretary character in the movie, it says here she didn't become his secretary until 1941. So they kind of moved up her storyline so they could have her interact with Churchill in this situation. I liked it. And I think it worked. I think it was necessary. Yeah. And the whole thing about her brother, this is a spoiler, her brother dying in the retreat to Dunkirk, that was an added fictional detail. Yeah. But anyway, those are kind of the a few historical enactions, but they're not bad.
There's nothing in there that really concerns me about this movie.
There's nothing that with for instance, with Braveheart, there are kind of some that. If you watch our review, you'll see those. I mean, they kind of what am I trying to say? They kind of bring the movie down a little bit, but not with this one. These were.
So, do you have any final thoughts?
All right, why don't you give yours first?
Okay, yeah. John needs a second to wet his lips. He's like, okay. Anyway, my final thoughts on this movie. This movie's a 9 out of 10 for me. 10 being perfect, and there are just a couple of discrepancies that brought it down for me. But other than that, this was set in a time that I'm super interested, about a subject that I'm super interested in, about a person that I'm super interested in, and then all of it was executed nearly seamlessly. And so that's why this gets such a high rating with me. I enjoyed this movie more than I would say the majority of the movies that we've watched on this channel, with some obvious exceptions that I hold in very high regard. And so if you are a person who enjoys World War II history in particular, this is a must-watch movie to understand the period, in my opinion.
It's a great film. Anyway, so what's your rating?
9 out of 10.
No, you gave 9 out of 10, my bad. Anyway, so echoing his thoughts, this movie is a solid 9 is so as I've said in the past, my kind of ranking system goes 5 is meh, just completely meh, makes sense, 5 out of 10. 6 is pretty good movie. 7's a solid good movie. 8 is really good. 8's a really good movie. 9 is great. And then anything above 9 is phenomenal, And obviously there is no such thing as a 10.
Yeah, we don't rate 10s.
Yeah, we don't rate 10s. Yeah, but if I had to rate this movie, I would give this a solid. Yeah, I mean, all I had was nitpicks. So I mean, literally, all I have is nitpicks, I gotta give it a 9.
Yep, it's a 9.
It's a phenomenal movie.
I think this is wait. I think this is the first time we've assigned the same score to a movie.
Yeah, or I think we did it for Troy. We both gave that a 7.
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
well,
anyway.
I generally, for some reason, my ranking system is a little bit different than Johnson's.
Explain yours kind of how you
I don't really think about it. I generally rank them higher than you do. Okay, I've noticed, and
I'm more of a critic.
I think it's because in my head I think 5 is terrible.
Okay.
And you think that 5 is meh, and so that's why my rankings.
Well, I ranked Pearl Harbor below 5 because that's one that I don't think is a great.
That was the only one you ranked below 5.
Yeah, that's the only thing. And you've never ranked one below.
No,
I think the lowest you went, I think, was 6.5 maybe.
Yeah.
I think with not Platoon.
Here's the thing: we're watching movies that are designed to pique my interest.
Yeah, these are all historical movies.
And so, that's what we're all about, since that is the case, I rarely go below 7 because these are all movies. For example, if for some reason we decided to watch Pitch Perfect for our next movie, that would probably. I mean, I don't actually even know what that movie's about.
I just heard of it.
But just say there was a movie that was designed to not pique my interest, you know, that was just boring or frivolous or long or whatever. I would, then that's when you would start to see me getting down to the 4 and 3 zone. So
anyway, back to my rating. By the way, shameless plug: if you want to see me hate on Pearl Harbor, go check out our Pearl Harbor review. Anyway, my final thoughts: 9 out of 10. This movie, I mean, Gary Oldman won a Best Actor award for this, and so should he have. I mean, this is one of the great performances in a period piece,
Yes,
and in general,
I
any
agree.
movie.
This is one of my favorite period pieces.
Yeah, I know. And so he just nails it. All the acting is great across the board. The screenplay is so crisp, and the dialogue is just so compelling. There's so many great, just emotional scenes, and it just the tension, as Nate elaborated on earlier, is just phenomenal. So many great things about this movie. My only nitpicks have to do with an accent at one point is kind of off-putting, not off-putting, but kind of takes me out of the movie. And also there's some problems with the historical context at times, and like how the transition of power works, for instance. Other than that, and with like Halifax, those are very much nitpicks.
Yeah.
Those aren't even problems with like the story or like those are very technical. Anyway, I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect movie, but this movie is very good. 9 out of 10. Highly recommend it. 2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up.
Go check it out.
Absolutely, go check it out. Thank you.
Well, we need to reinstitute an old custom.
What's that?
So, we need to do Nate's message to the director.
Oh, okay.
What is your line? We did this with the first one, and I think we did it one other time.
Yeah.
Nate, what is your message to Joe Wright?
My message to Joe Wright. I feel like we're slipping into Aussie there.
That is a little bit. I can't do.
Yeah, my message to Joe Wright is, first of all, phenomenal job. I could have never made a movie as good as that. That is for sure. Second of all, tell your director friends to make more movies like this, because we need more movies like this that are inspiring stories about great men that are faithfully told. We need that in our culture right now. Absolutely need that. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us for another episode.
Not Joe Biden.
Check in next time. I'm gonna try to talk John into watching a really bad movie next time.
Oh shoot!
So that we can absolutely rat it. That would be
We
hilarious.
tried with Pearl Harbor. I ratted it. You were wooed
Next
by
time
it.
we will find one. We will hate it. Okay. So anyway, I'll see ya. We clocked in at 40 minutes this time. That's better.
Yeah.
Anyhow, bye.
Yeah. See ya.